Welcome back to Follow the Rabbit, hosted by Igor Schwarzmann and me, Johannes. Follow the Rabbit is the podcast where we decode cultural phenomena and help you update your mental models of the world. When was the last time you read a print magazine? If the signals are right, there's a good chance you might do it again pretty soon. Today, we dive into the topic of print magazines, triggered by an article in the New York Times about the revenge of the niche fashion magazine. We were a bit surprised by that because for us, it never really felt like print magazines, and especially indie magazines, went away. But it was a good opportunity to look again at the cultural phenomena of print magazines and why they seem to come and go, why every couple of years print is declared dead and then they come back. And we look at all of these topics, especially in a post-pandemic world where physical objects, artifacts that we can touch, seem to gain a new significance. We also talk a lot about the context of digital fatigue and how this pushes a lot of people again to printed publications that have a different way to consume them, a different haptic, a different feel to them. And we try to understand what's happening here on a deeper level. It's also, after so many episodes of Follow the Rabbit, the first one where we really go deep on one of our favorite best practice cases in media for the last, 15 years, Monocle magazine, and the brand with a lot of sister publications, events, and stuff like that. So you're going to hear that a lot because we have observed them for so long, so we have a lot of insight there. We also look at print magazines from an advertiser's perspective, why it has become so much more appealing to once again advertise in print publications than online. All of that and much more in this episode of Follow the Rabbit. As always, we're very interested in your feedback, your questions. You can leave us a comment. Of course, you already have subscribed on Spotify or YouTube or in your favorite podcatcher. And you can send us an email at ftr@knownunknowns.xyz. We'll love to hear from you. Here's the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Follow the Rabbit. Today, we're discussing print magazines. Yes, on a podcast, we're discussing print magazines, and a little story in the New York Times caught our attention about the re-emergence of the print magazine. And I have to say, smirk a little bit about it because it feels like that's a continuous thing that everyone writes every 5 years since about a decade or so. But I actually, and I mean that, and not only because Johannes is my co-host, but in the true sense that I don't think anyone out there is more qualified to talk about the reemergence or not of print magazines than he is, because he is the only person that I know who has the first published edition of Monocle. So his affinity to print magazine goes a long, long time now. Johannes, are they back now for sure?
I just looked at the title of the article. It's The Revenge of the Niche Fashion Magazine. I'm like, what exactly are they revenging about? So yeah, it's always a fun topic for us to pick up, just for some context. So I don't think I would be here without print magazines, because I basically grew up in the time when there was still very little internet around as a teenager, and magazines were my way into the world. And I still remember today. So 18 years ago, I went to a train station in my hometown of Darmstadt. So I went to the train station because they always have the best magazine stores in Germany. And looked around in the international section. There was a very bookish, super thick magazine that had the title or the claim of the global briefing on affairs, business, culture, design, and edits. And I was like, this is like right up my alley. Everything is in that. And that was actually the third issue of Monocle. So I missed the first one. I bought it later for the collection. So I missed the first one, and so I've been and just for a little bit more context, that was in 2007, which seemed to be like the worst time to start a print magazine, because once like there was a economic crisis around the corner, already very like easy to make out, and it was the time of the iPad, and everybody who was in digital publishing or in publishing in general was like, the print magazine is over. Now everything is on the iPad. I don't know how many magazines you've read lately on the iPad, but I'm guessing it's not going to be that much. So I and we both have been following this development over a long time. So it seems to come in waves. We always had, especially here in Germany, a very strong magazine culture. I mean, there are like the famous weeklies from Zeit and Spiegel, Stern, and many others. But there's also, I think, especially in Europe and the US and even in more countries now, a very strong indie culture, indie magazine cultures of just enthusiasts doing these kind of magazines. So it's interesting to see over time how they have developed, how the business model has developed. I mean, it's been some rough years with especially paper prices being very expensive. I know for Monocle, they used to print in the UK. Brexit was a big problem, so they moved actually all of their printing to Germany and all of their logistics and stuff like that. So it's interesting to see them. I don't think they were ever gone, but it's interesting, and that's what we want to talk about today, is how it actually might have shifted, like their role, and their also in an ecosystem of organizations, companies, and brands, how they now take up a different role of what they serve for.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a couple of things. So Monocle, obviously, Tyler is famous for, I think, understanding that there is always a specific niche of customer that also doesn't necessarily go with the overall trend. And I think that's a very important part about generally magazines or print in general, like understanding that we tend to subsume kind of like the narrative into a winner takes all kind of thing, where because billions of people are consuming billions of minutes on TikTok, we assume that everything else doesn't exist. And that is just not true. And it's actually kind of a really healthy way of building healthy economies that are strong and resilient in and on itself, because you're not exposed to super fast kind of like trend cycles. That being said, I think like indie magazines, I mean, um, uh, we've been kind of frequent buyers at Do You Read Me in Berlin, which was for a long time, I think, like at least in the Western Hemisphere, the go-to or one of the go-to magazine shops that has the strangest, most expensive collection of things and magazines that you would otherwise not kind of get anywhere else unless you are willing to order them online and pay exuberant kind of like shipping cost. But they just also invested so much time in finding those really tiny gems where people pour their souls into building magazines. So in a way, like since 2007, really, we observed this thing where there's always a community around indie magazines. And I don't like, I never felt like indie magazines will fall off the wagon no matter how much digital time we're allocating to them, because a little bit like with EPUBs, there seems to be a cap of how high it goes and how low it goes. EPUBs never crossed kind of that magic margin where they replace the printed book. and it feels like they're stagnating in that space. But indie magazines never kind of went completely under. And not only that, I mean, throughout the years, we observed things like kinfolk that certainly made a huge impact on the way how lifestyle publishing operates not only in print but really across the board. I think they were a major force in shaping this idea of minimalism, which uh, people wrote about extensively. And so I think the influence of indie magazines in a way has always been very strong. So the title of this article is kind of a little bit strange, despite the fact that they do mention a few interesting examples, right?
Yeah, so they mention culture, etiquette, polyester, and those are like magazines who focus on or like they typically like fashion magazines, like they have large fashion shoots, they work with celebrities, but they really focus on the quality and make it like a really premium experience. I mean, they also mention Confect. Confect is interesting because it's a sister magazine to Monocle. Monocle launched that when they realized that they have like from their surveys they have a very like a 70% male audience, but at their events it would always be 50-50, and all of the women seem to be very familiar with the content of the magazine, and they're like, oh, maybe there is something that we can do.
There's a small anecdote that I need to tell you about Monocle and their events, because when we were both last year in London, and because Johannes is a Monocle patron, we attended a Monocle event about what was it, yachts
No,
and private
it was
jets.
private jets. Yeah,
It was
mostly
private
private jets.
jets.
Yeah.
And the event started with the question, do you get first a yacht or first a private jet? Which I felt like this talks to my soul. Um, um, uh, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is that you can see also there is, a certain style that Monocle cultivated over a long period of time, and they're doing it so well. And I think very few organizations are able to be so consistent across time. It makes them so recognizable and so relatable. So I kind of really understand why they would launch a sister magazine, which, doesn't compromise the idea of what Monocle is and allows them to really speak about different things and different styles. So yeah, I think that was a really cool move from them.
Yeah, but just to stay on that, so one aspect that also the article mentions is community building, and I think that's in a very digital world where communities are always connected to platforms. It's interesting how these very physical objects can gather like a community around them, and they all do events. So just like you always have a launch event for the next issue, you just have a lot of events. And like, I mean, Tyler Boulay, the founder of Monocle, is famous for always like mentioning that their social media is a rosé in hand, and speaking face to face. And so a completely different example of that is Pata, which is also mentioned in the article, which is actually is a sneaker store in Amsterdam,
Streetwear,
a
streetwear
streetwear
brand
store,
from.
yeah, from Amsterdam, and they launched a magazine that's very much focused on their whole culture, or the community that has built around this brand, what they're thinking, not just so that they show the clothing, but they also talk about the topics that are interested to them, like where they come from, their stories. It's an object. It's free. It's like it's always like not sold out, but like not available anymore because everybody's trying to grab it as fast as they want. And it's an object that builds community, and that's why, for example, was also interesting. Like Monocle understood this better and better from their events and from the cafes they have where they meet their readers and understand, oh, there's actually a very close circle. And so they, like 2 years ago, started a Patron circle where you can you pay a bit more, but then you get everything they put out, sent right to your door, and they do some like special events to bring this community together and to actually to foster a closer relationship. And I think this is something where I think the real point here is to see like a better recognition of that these indie magazines are not just serving like they're just like straight up business model like very large glossy magazines would be, but they have a lot of different roles that are much more like individualized, and community building is a big part of that.
Yeah, and I mean, on the risk that the Snapchat ghost of Nathan Jurgensen will come and hunt us, I think it's kind of funny that those magazines exist basically only because we're so online, right?
Yeah.
And because we're so online, as in quotation marks and actual reality, there is a space for print manifestations of, brand communication, marketing things that is valued by the person that they're addressing, but it couldn't exist without it being like existing online, right? Like the Pata magazine wouldn't have a circulation like that, or wouldn't have kind of like that exclusivity to it without Pata mentioning the fact that they did a print magazine. And it's funny because it's such a really small twist, right? Like wherever you go, you still find in most kind of retail stores some kind of weird handout by a brand that needs to do something really cheaply. And they will print something and it will be there and it will never be sold out because there is no quality to it, there's no heart to it, there is nothing that also like makes them want to mention that on their social media or digital channels. So it exists kind of like as a separate thing,
Yeah.
and then does kind of never gets the attention that it needs. So all of those other brands compared to something like Pata or Highsnobiety, they never think of it as a holistic system of systems. They're kind of really thinking about individual kind of channels that, some department is in charge of the print stuff, and they never really like talk to the other people. So I think there is some kind of interesting effect happening where the brands that understand that we can be both excited about a really cool video on YouTube, but at the same time also be really excited about a print magazine can do this thing and build communities around those artifacts, like brands like Bandit and so forth, where, a digital, like a physical running brand that started from a community, created memberships for their customers that aren't that inexpensive really, um, became a really cultural manifestation, and started opening up shops, retail stuff. And you were like, D2C brands opening up retail? What is happening? Oh yeah, because people want to hang out. They want to be part of that experience. And print is an essential component to that.
Yeah, I think there's so much interesting development in there. So you touched on the collectibility of these artifacts. Like that's something that I mean, Web3 and NFTs have tried that, but
Yeah.
it's a perfect example, these magazines, why it doesn't work like that, because it's hard to like hold it up into like your Instagram stream, and show it or something like that. I think that makes a lot of part of it. What I also find really interesting is looking at that from an advertiser's point of view, because that's usually what the magazines like. So I mean, magazines are the original version of you're the product sold to an advertiser, because that's how
That's
they
true.
work.
Yeah.
It's always about like, so we bring the audience so that you can show them to you. And if you ask an advertiser today from like a luxury brand or a premium brand, or a fashion brand or any one of those, what's the space where you want to present your brand, where you want to show yourself? And almost all, like, of course, they are all in like advertising and on digital platforms and social media platforms, but it's always like everybody's just scrolling by. It's really hard for them to like really make an impression. But if you pick up a magazine and you open it up and you flip through it, you have a very different understanding of that. And I mean, especially in where we're seeing some social media platforms going, brand safety is a really huge thing. You don't want your premium brand to be presented right beside like an Elon Musk tweet about some bullshit. That's really not the context you want to show up in. And so I think, or what I get from the article, but mostly from just our observations, is that I think this is also driven by advertisers' interest to find these niches again. And so there's like Tyler tells one story. So like 2 years ago, they launched what they call Companion. So it's like a very thick,
it's very bookish
collection, very bookish collection of I think like 50 short essays, very easy to read. And they did the first edition in collaboration with Rolex. So it would just have like you can see it here, a couple of like colored pages, and it's just like an advertorial for one brand. So it's one brand per edition of the Companion. They did it for Rolex, longtime partner with them, very usual. The second edition, they had Siemens as a partner talking about their industrial metaverse, what they would do. And they did it because, as Tyler tells the story, the marketing head of Siemens said, like, this is the perfect branding opportunity in the digital world, because this is how you stand out, because it's 10 pages, very well designed, of telling your story to an audience who is receptive to that, who is interested in reading that. And I think this
if only they wouldn't have talked about the metaverse.
Yeah, but I think like I actually think for them, like the industrial metaverse might still be something that is around and is developed. I have no idea, but it's I think it's a perfect example of where you have a super digital product where they still think it's best to get attention for that in such a premium space. And I think this is really driving the whole print magazine thing forward again, because of the digital advertising space that we experience right now. There's a new opportunity for these print magazines.
So I picked this up before, and I kind of like so this is a John Wilshire artifact that I think is appropriate for really all of the podcasts that we do. But in this one specifically, I think like that example that you brought, I know that some people will listen to this and be like, well, that's just kind of boomers thinking that they need to advertise in some print publishing thing, and it really has no reach, and compared to digital platforms, it has almost like no visibility. And purely statistically speaking, I think that's correct. And I think like one small kind of asterisk about the indie magazine, I think it's important to understand that the indie magazine as a category has been doing quite well over time. That doesn't necessarily mean that magazines in that category have been doing well. I think it's still, and probably will always be, an excruciatingly painful financially endeavor to run an indie magazine, because you're always kind of stuck in a niche where it's very hard to monetize it. Even if advertisers are waking up and kind of thinking about safe spaces to advertise, I think it's still a very, very hard thing to do this, because it lives always at the intersection of kind of art and business. And in that space, to oscillate and be really good at figuring out how to manage that is just really hard. And most of those people who go in and doing this, they do this because it's a passion project, and they do not have the kind of experience and also ambition that Tyler Brule has to kind of scale it up right away, and they also don't know one of the investors in Rolex to kind of help them start a whole thing. But coming back to the boomers and the advertising, I think what we're definitely seeing is that, well, a productive form of nostalgia kind of emerged, I think, like in a younger generation. I have to say, like, I used to like I have still kind of a very strong emotional reaction to nostalgia, because I find it mostly a waste of time. Um, but what we're definitely seeing in form of those print magazines, but like as a lens into looking into who is interested in them, why are they buying what they're buying, how are they expressing certain things. That nostalgia is an expression of like an alternative history that people are trying to imagine. I mean, we see that with Gen Z, Y2K fashion. There is almost the attempt of forking an alternative path to a digital environment that is not as extractive as this one is. Because now it is self-evident to everyone that, digital companies, like the big digital companies, aren't there to serve our needs. They're really there to kind of like, I mean, that was kind of, like for 10 years, we've been talking about just kind of the UX or human-centered design, and people assume that they're doing studies to figure out what we want, which is, never true. And in a way, an indie magazine also doesn't really want to know what we want. They want to position themselves as an authority to say, this is what you should be paying attention to. But that relationship is quite different. You do not have to be buying an indie magazine. Well, you certainly have a lot of pressure to be online because you're otherwise kind of like struggling financially from attention and so forth. So I think there is a nostalgia that is a signal for how we want to turn around and manage a way of dealing with the digital environment that we live in. And we keep oscillating. We are all very online, but we also are buying more and more physical goods that are expressive of what we like, and we want to communicate it to people. I remember Boris Anthony, a friend of ours, talking about, this idea that books on a shelf are a way to communicate certain things that ebooks can never do. And he did a lot of like experiments around this idea of how to manifest, what you read on ebooks in a space. So I think there is no lack of thinking around those topics, but that nostalgia is rooted in I think in a desire that is then also economically very interesting to advertisers.
Yeah, for sure. And just to give you some numbers so that it doesn't always like it's not just something that we make up in our minds. So
What?
it's all just made up in our minds. It's the art of creation. 90%, so 90% of Americans under 25 read magazines in print and digital forms. 62% of millennials prefer printed magazines over digital editions. And 92% of 18 to 23-year-olds report finding print easier to read than digital content. Young readers deliberately choose print as a respite from screen time and to escape algorithm-driven experiences. So this is not, and I think this is why we're talking about this again, or it seems there's a new wave of these niche magazines coming, and just to like go even a bit deeper and to add to what you said. So there is definitely like the two connected underlying drivers that we see, and the first one is an evergreen on this podcast. It's the post-pandemic times. It's like we've lived for a couple of years in almost exclusively digital worlds. So I think maybe we had the metaverse for like 3 years.
A brief moment in
A
history.
brief moment of the metaverse. Might have not felt like it, but could always say so.
No, I also have like
Yeah.
I like another asterisk. I think it's kind of funny because the Vision Pro and Apple and failed, obviously. But the Oculus environment is going very strong, and millions of also young people are engaging in VR and AR kind of activities. So I would like it's kind of funny for me. I feel like VR is like the indie magazine. It's like it's actually there, but nobody's paying attention to it.
It's true.
I would put
Yeah, so
that into
beware of
that.
the hype. Beware of the hype, I
Yeah.
think is this part. So we have this post-pandemic movement. So we see a lot of reactions as the counter push to how it was in the pandemic, where everything was about digital. But I think and as you already alluded to, there's also a huge like post-digital part. Like, so there is the joke is that digital dualism, as you said, is back. Or the question is, was it ever really a thing of this like strong understanding between digital and the real world? And at least to this point right now, it very much feels like that. So because there's so much, as we quoted, so much digital fatigue, especially with young people who see a trajectory of that and say, we cannot continue to go down this road. It will lead into despair, or we already are in despair, and it's just gonna get worse. There has to be a different thing, and they're looking for that, and they're looking to artifacts, they're looking to objects that provide this, and it's so interesting for me because in the end, to like really bring it back to where I started, magazines have always been these artifacts of culture. Like you said, they're not. I mean, there are definitely ones, and there were the strong ones for some time that were purely commercial. Like if you buy the cheaper fashion magazines at the supermarket or something like that, where everything is purely commercial, everything is a brand collaboration, it feels cheap. Um, but then there have always been these indie magazines. And I know so many people, especially our age, where they said like, yeah, I remember these issues of certain magazines, like in like Neon in Germany or something like that.
Yeah.
Like really, like they influenced a whole generation about how they thought about relationships and work and stuff like that. They were really the things that brought a lot of people together, or set the tone, like put talking points out. And I think especially in such a like overwhelming digital environment, I think we're like trying to give this to an institution again, and print magazines have always been that, and so I think that's nice to see that they get attention again, and hopefully they will bring people together and provide new opportunities for people to have a story to tell it to a more rapt audience.
I wonder if there is a mechanic at play where a magazine will never have the kind of reach that digital environments have, but for the reader um, uh, that basically decides to immerse themselves in, they will always have a much bigger impact, and that's why the secondary effects or the secondary impact of a print magazine is exponentially much bigger than its core audience, in a sense that a person who was shaped by magazine culture will always kind of use more of that culture and will be able to also kind of manifest it a little more. I mean, that's very reductive, but kind of like as a way of thinking, as like what does leave a bigger impression on us. Um, it feels like obviously there are millions of people engaged in meme culture, but we tend to think about this always like as a duality. It's like, oh, you cannot be interested in the physical if you're like such a meme nerd or something like that, which I don't think is true. And I don't think necessarily that what I said is like one answer to that. I think it's well, this is thinking out loud right now. I guess like the question is, how do we like how much immersion do we allow ourselves? And obviously digital environments can provide a lot of immersion as well. But the tactile, physical environment that is less destructive seems to have big impacts on our way how we memorize things and how we are shaped by them. So I think that's also a very strong proposition for making new print magazines and having advertisers show up in them.
And use them to bring people together. I mean, just for a final anecdote, I was just in Paris because Monocle opened a cafe slash shop slash bureau in Paris, and they invited Patron Circle members for a dinner there. And it was for me really the first time to spend a lot of time with other fans of the brand, not just the magazine. Committed fans. Which was fascinating and we all have this brand in common that we like. Then seeing how different we all are from the backgrounds we come in, it was really interesting. So they did a dinner. It was very loud, a lot of alcohol, more like partying together. And then like the next morning they did a live radio show from they have a studio in the back. Is whoever is still is able to can come around at 8. There will be coffee and croissants, and you can listen to the live show from the studio. And actually, quite a lot of people showed up. We never listened to the radio show because everybody instantly got to talking again, and it was so interesting because it was where the night before was loud and drunk. Now everybody was mostly sober again, just sitting down, very relaxed. And I had like conversations that went on for like 45 minutes. I spent another 3 hours just talking to people and like exchanging different views. And Monocle has a very global readership, so people who are from all over the place. You get different ideas, like how do you see that? What's the situation there? Just like this opportunity to bring people together in a physical space that was curated and all of that by the brand. I think there's so much opportunity there right now in this environment. And so, yeah, so I think this, I have to, I thought like earlier, so we made it this far without doing a Monocle episode, which is kind of unusual for us because it's just a fascinating brand to observe for such a long time. And we as media nerds obviously always looked into it. So here it is. Finally.
And it's neither sponsored by Monocle nor by winemakers.
No,
which is a shame.
We pay a lot. So I pay a lot for this. Yeah. It's definitely not sponsored.
But if you basically, to kind of like give you something to take away, start noticing things and questioning them, and then focus on the physical ones. I know that there is so much little stuff happening. There are a lot of, global things happening in the world right now that are affecting us all. And they create a lot of injustice. They harm a lot of people. And we need to stay informed, but at the same time, we also need to figure out where can we make our own impact, and what kind of like resources do we have, and unpacking certain behaviors to really understand them not as just fleeting things is something that you need to do. And I would recommend starting with the physical ones right now, because the digital ones are making less and less sense.
I mean, we haven't even touched on the whole like print magazines as like counterpoints to AI slop and stuff like that. But again, like we don't even have to explain it. It's so obvious that when your LinkedIn and everything is filled with like cheaply generated AI content, you look for the one that where there is a lot of care and deep thinking in that, and that's where what magazines and books are for.
With that, we thank you for listening, for your attention, even if it's not in print form, but you never know. And we hope you find those conversations interesting. If you do, please listen to other episodes, or recommend it to someone who you think should be listening in. And with that, thank you, Johannes. Thank you all for listening, and until next time.
Thanks, Igor. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.